They called each other soulmates. On social media, it looked like a modern fairy tale. A young woman, full of life, and her boyfriend, building a future in their new top-floor apartment. But behind the closed door of that flat in Scotland, something demonic was waiting to be unleashed. It wasn't just a murder. It was a descent into absolute depravity. For 48 hours, while her family sent texts asking if she was okay, her killer sat on the sofa just feet away from her body. He ordered pizza. He scrolled through the internet. He lived his life as if the woman he claimed to love wasn't lying, mutilated in the hallway. When he finally picked up the phone to call 999, his voice was chillingly calm. He told the operator he had to muster up the courage to make the call. But when police walked through that door, they didn't find a grieving boyfriend. They found a scene so horrific, so devoid of humanity, that it would haunt even the most hardened detectives for the rest of their lives. This is the story of Phoenix Spencer Horn and the monster who wore the mask of a lover. Phoenix Spencer Horn was only 21 years old, standing at the threshold of what should have been a long and beautiful life. Phoenix worked as a waitress, taking shifts that sometimes ran late into the evening, always greeting customers with a genuine smile that made even the hardest days feel lighter. 2 years before her death, Phoenix met Methvan at a family party. He was older by 6 years, working as a postman, and something about him drew her in. They fell into a relationship that seemed, from the outside, like a fairy tale. Phoenix posted about him on social media, calling him her soulmate. She wrote that life was so much more beautiful and full of color with him. To those who knew her, Phoenix seemed genuinely happy. She and Methvan had recently moved into a top-floor apartment in Glen Lee, East Kilbride, a quiet area in South Lanarkshire. They were building a life together, or so everyone believed. On November 16, 2024, Methvan sent Phoenix a text message while she was working her shift. He complained that her job was making him lonely. It was a small complaint, the kind many couples have. But for Methvan, it festered into something darker. When he returned home from his own job that day, he ordered takeaway food and waited. He wanted them to eat together when she got home. It seemed like a normal evening, a boyfriend waiting for his girlfriend to finish work so they could share a meal. At 9:37 p.m., Phoenix sent her mother, Alison Spencer, a text message. She told her mum that she and Methvan were having dinner. Everything seemed fine. Phoenix had been in good spirits at work that day. She'd seen her mother just the day before. There was no indication that anything was wrong, no sign that within hours, Phoenix would be dead. The attack happened late on Saturday night, November 16, 2024. Inside the top-floor apartment in Glen Lee, something snapped inside Methvan. The takeaway had been ordered. The meal was waiting. But when Phoenix came home, instead of a quiet dinner with her boyfriend, she walked into a horror she never could have imagined. The man she called her soulmate, the man she trusted with her life, turned on her with a violence so extreme that it defies comprehension. Methvan's hands closed around Phoenix's throat. He strangled her, cutting off her air, watching as she struggled beneath his grip. But strangling her wasn't enough. Even as she fought for breath, even as the life began draining from her body, Methvan grabbed a knife, then another, then another. He stabbed Phoenix Spencer Horn 20 times. 10 of those brutal stab wounds were inflicted directly on her face, destroying the features that had smiled at him just hours before. The fatal wound was a deep stab to her chest, piercing through to her vital organs. But he didn't stop there. He stabbed her in other areas of her chest. He stabbed her in the buttocks. 3 separate knives were used in the attack, each one becoming a weapon of unimaginable brutality. The noise of the struggle echoed through the building. A downstairs neighbor heard loud sounds and hurried footsteps around midnight. The activity was so intense that Methvan's phone, which tracked his steps, recorded a sudden spike at 12:13 a.m. Phoenix fought. She tried to survive, but against a man who had lost all control, who had descended into a frenzy of violence, she had no chance. The woman who had brought color and beauty into the world was bleeding out on the floor of her own home, murdered by the man who claimed to love her. But what Methvan did next was even more depraved. Most people, even those who commit murder in a moment of rage, stop once the victim is dead. They call for help, they panic, they run. Methvan did none of those things. Instead, he looked down at Phoenix's body and made a calculated decision. He would not let anyone know what he had done. He would cover it up. He would erase the evidence. And to do that, he would have to destroy the woman he claimed to have loved. Meth Van grabbed one of the knives and began cutting. He decapitated Phoenix Spencer Horn, severing her head from her body. Then he tried to dismember her completely. He attempted to cut off her arms, her legs. He tried to separate her torso into pieces. Lord Matthews, the judge who would eventually sentence him, said that Meth Van robbed Phoenix of all dignity in death. She was not just killed, she was mutilated, desecrated, treated like an object to be disposed of, rather than a human being who had loved him. And then Meth Van did something that reveals the true depths of his depravity. He didn't call the police. He didn't confess. He didn't break down in horror at what he'd done. Instead, he spent the next 2 days living his life as if nothing had happened. Phoenix's body lay in the hallway of their apartment, covered up and hidden from view. Blood stained the walls and floors. 2 knives lay next to her remains. A third was in the bathroom, still covered in her blood. And you and Meth Van simply carried on. He picked up Phoenix's phone and began sending text messages. He pretended to be her. He messaged her mother, Allison, making it seem like Phoenix was still alive and well. Allison had no idea that the messages she was receiving weren't from her daughter at all. She had no idea that Phoenix was already dead, her body mutilated and hidden just a few miles away. Meth Van crafted these messages carefully, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal, that Phoenix was simply busy or spending time with him. It was a level of deception that required planning, focus, and a complete absence of remorse. While Phoenix's mother waited to hear from her daughter, Meth Van was indulging himself. He spent the entire weekend abusing drugs. He drove Phoenix's red Corsa around town, using her car as if it were his own. He scrolled through her phone, looking through her messages, her photos, her private life. And then he did something that shows just how twisted his mind had become. He searched for internet pornography, not once, not a few times, 170 times over the course of that weekend. While his girlfriend's decapitated body lay in the hallway, Meth Van was satisfying his own desires, completely disconnected from the horror he had created. He also made multiple attempts to purchase cocaine. He reached out to dealers, trying to get more drugs to fuel his weekend of depravity. Meth Van was not in a state of shock. He was not paralyzed by guilt. He was actively seeking pleasure while Phoenix's family began to worry about why they hadn't heard from her. The coldness of his actions is almost impossible to comprehend. This was not a man who had snapped and immediately regretted his actions. This was a man who murdered his girlfriend, mutilated her body, and then spent 2 days living as if she had never mattered at all. Tony Brown, a next-door neighbor, began to notice something was wrong. She smelled a bad odor coming from her kitchen, where the apartment walls joined Meth Van's flat. It was a smell that made her uncomfortable, a smell that something wasn't right. But she had no idea what was happening just feet away from her. Years later, she would describe the experience as horrific, saying it gave her shivers thinking about it. The terror of knowing that Phoenix had been lying there while she went about her normal life, completely oblivious to the nightmare next door, would haunt her. For 48 hours, Meth Van maintained his facade. But on Monday, November 18th, 2024, something changed. Perhaps the reality of what he had done finally began to sink in. Perhaps he realized he couldn't keep up the charade forever. Perhaps he simply ran out of ways to explain why Phoenix wasn't answering calls or showing up to work. Whatever the reason, at around 12:10 p.m. on that Monday afternoon, Meth Van finally picked up his phone and dialed 999, the UK emergency line. When the operator answered, Meth Van claimed he was trying to muster up the courage to call. He attempted to paint himself as a victim of circumstances beyond his control. He told the operator that the murder had occurred during a psychotic episode brought on by taking cocaine, alcohol, and steroids. He claimed he thought the substances had been spiked. He said he had totally blacked out through the whole thing, as if he had no memory of stabbing Phoenix 20 times, decapitating her, and attempting to dismember her body. It was a convenient excuse, one that would shift blame away from him and onto the drugs. But there was a problem with Meth Van's story. A delivery driver who had seen him at 8 p.m. on the night of the murder reported that Meth Van did not appear to be drunk or under the influence of anything. He seemed completely normal, alert, in control. The psychotic episode story began to crumble before it even had a chance to take hold. Meth Van wasn't blacked out. He knew exactly what he was doing. He strangled Phoenix. He stabbed her repeatedly. He decapitated her. He spent 2 days covering up his crime and indulging in drugs and pornography. And then, when he finally couldn't hide it anymore, He called the police and tried to blame it all on substances he claimed were spiked. When police arrived at the flat in Glen Lee, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Phoenix Spencerhorn's mutilated and decapitated body was discovered in the hallway, covered up as Methvan had left it. 2 blood-stained knives lay next to her remains. A 3rd bloodied knife was found in the bathroom. The walls were stained with blood. The evidence of the struggle was everywhere. Officers who had seen countless crime scenes in their careers were shaken by what they found. This wasn't just a murder. This was a desecration. Methvan was calm when the police arrived. He didn't resist. He didn't try to run. He simply accepted what was about to happen. When officers arrested him, he made a chilling confession. He told them, "I could not stay here with her like that. I tried to dismember her. I moved her from the bath and put her there." It was a cold, matter-of-fact admission of guilt, delivered without emotion. He wasn't crying. He wasn't breaking down. He was simply explaining what he had done, as if he were describing a chore he'd completed. After being placed in a police cell, Methvan made another statement that revealed his mindset. He looked around at the cold walls and the bars and said, "I guess this is what my next 25 years look like." It was a remarkably accurate prediction. Even before he was formally charged, even before he appeared in court, Methvan seemed to understand that his life as he knew it was over. But there was no remorse in that statement. No horror at what he had done to Phoenix. Just a resignation to the consequences he would face. Phoenix's family was notified of her death, and their world collapsed. The young woman they loved, the daughter and sister who had brought so much joy into their lives, was gone. And she hadn't just been killed. She had been violated in death, her body treated with such disrespect that they would never be able to say goodbye to her properly. The comfort that many families find in viewing their loved one last time, in seeing them at peace, was stolen from them. Phoenix's family would have to live with the knowledge of what had been done to her, and that knowledge would haunt them forever. Ewan Methvan was formally charged with murder and with attempting to defeat the ends of justice. The second charge related to his efforts to cover up the crime, including the decapitation and attempted dismemberment of Phoenix's body, as well as his use of her phone to send false messages to her family. On June 17, 2025, Methvan appeared at the High Court in Glasgow and pleaded guilty to both charges. There would be no trial, no drawn-out legal battle. Methvan admitted what he had done. His defense counsel, Tony Graham, stood before the court and acknowledged the impossible position they were in. He stated that those related to and friends of Phoenix were likely to regard Ewan Methvan as the personification of evil. He said that Methvan recognized the relatives would never be able to forgive him, and that he could not forgive himself. Graham told the court that Methvan understood the bereaved family would seek an explanation for why he had done this, but that he could not provide one. There was no answer that would make sense, no reason that would justify what he had done to Phoenix. Methvan himself wrote a letter to the judge. In it, he stated, "I know how loved Phoenix was and how she made her family complete. I cannot believe I have taken her from them." But the letter also contained something that infuriated the court. Methvan attempted to blame the crime on the effect of substances, once again claiming that drugs and alcohol had caused him to lose control. Lord Matthews, the judge presiding over the case, shut down that excuse immediately. He stated unequivocally that substance abuse was no excuse for what Methvan had done. The judge made it clear that Methvan's choices, not the drugs, were responsible for Phoenix's death. On July 14, 2025, Lord Matthews delivered Methvan's sentence. The courtroom was packed with Phoenix's family and friends, all waiting to hear what punishment would be handed down for the man who had destroyed their lives. Lord Matthews began by acknowledging the severity of the crime. He called it a dreadful crime and emphasized the betrayal of trust that made it even worse. Methvan had been a trusted member of Phoenix's family. He had been welcomed into their lives, treated as one of them, and he had repaid that trust by murdering Phoenix in the most brutal way imaginable. The judge stated that he had rarely read such outpourings of grief as those contained in the victim impact statements from Phoenix's family. Their pain was evident in every word they had written. They described the hole that Phoenix's death had left in their lives, the unbearable knowledge of how she had suffered, and the fact that they would never be able to say goodbye to her properly. Lord Matthews acknowledged that the treatment of Phoenix after her death meant her family was deprived of the comfort of a final farewell. That violation, that desecration of her body, added another layer of cruelty to an already unimaginable crime. Lord Matthews sentenced Ewan Methvan to life imprisonment. It was the only sentence available for murder under Scottish law. But the judge also had to set a punishment part, the minimum amount of time Methvan would serve before he could even be considered for parole. For the charge of attempting to defeat the ends of justice, the sentence was set at 5 years. That was reduced from 6 years because Methvan had pleaded guilty, sparing the family the trauma of a trial. But the real focus was on the murder charge. Lord Matthews set the punishment part at 23 years. This included an additional 20 months attributable to what the law calls partner aggravation, meaning the crime was made worse by the fact that Methvan and Phoenix were in an intimate relationship. The judge noted that if the case had gone to trial, the punishment part would have been 27 years, including 2 years for the partner aggravation. Methvan's guilty plea had saved him for years, but it didn't change the fundamental reality. He would spend at least 23 years behind bars before anyone would even consider whether he should be released. The judge acknowledged the only mitigating factors in Methvan's favor. He had no prior criminal record. He had pleaded guilty, which showed some level of acceptance of responsibility. But Lord Matthews made it clear that these factors did little to reduce the severity of the sentence. The crime was too horrific. The betrayal to complete, the suffering inflicted on Phoenix and her family too immense. Methvan would serve his time, and even after 23 years, there was no guarantee he would ever be released. The decision about whether he would eventually be granted parole would be left to others in the future, but Phoenix's family refused to let her story end in silence. After a fundraising page raised thousands of pounds for funeral costs, they made a decision that would honor her memory in the most powerful way possible. They donated much of the money to Women's Aid, a charity that supports victims of domestic violence and works to prevent future tragedies. The Glasgow branch of Women's Aid thanked the family and issued a statement that captured the essence of Phoenix's legacy. They said her name, Phoenix, now stands for more than loss. It stands for action, for change, for refusing to let her story end in silence. Ewan Methvan sits in a prison cell now, serving his life sentence. The man who once posted loving messages about his soulmate is now known as a killer, a man who destroyed the woman he claimed to love. Phoenix Spencer Horn, just 21 years old, will never get to live the life she deserved, but her name will live on, not as a victim, but as a force for change. Her family made sure of that, and in doing so, they gave Phoenix's life meaning beyond the horror of her death. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Till next time, stay sharp.